I hope those people can come in. I want to welcome you to this side event, which is on transforming agri-food systems in the drylands of Africa. And we are going to have a discussion on climate resilience, nutrition sensitive and gender responsive food systems. And we have a number of partners that have been working on this side event. ICRISAT, we have FANPAN, but we also have IMI. Now, this parallel session will discuss ways to strengthen food system through promoting nutrition-sensitive agriculture, as I said, and we'll be leveraging on the resilient crops and the smart food initiatives that ICRISAT and its partners in the drylands, as I mentioned, have been working on. The aim of this session is to brainstorm on developing strategies that can promote these technologies in the drylands of Africa. We really want to delve on the ways that we can actually take these technologies to scale, to ensuring resilience among smallholder farmers in these drylands, and linking this to agriculture, nutrition, and entrepreneurship. We are going to have distinguished panelists that are going to be joining us both online, but also we are going to have those that are going to be here physically. On our program, before I introduce those panelists, I just want to also say that at the beginning, we'll have an opportunity to see a 5-minute video, which is going to depict some of the work that ICRISAT and its partners have been doing in the dryland agroecologies of Africa. And then we are going to get into our keynote. Our keynote speaker is going to be joining us online, and it's Dr. Arvind Kumar, who is the Deputy Director General for Research in ICRISAT. And we are also going to have another presentation, again online, which will be coming from Dr. Saikat Mazunda, who is the Cluster Leader of Nutrition, Dietary Behavior, and Smart Food, and Chief of CCOO of the Nutrition Plus Knowledge Program. Again, he's going to join us virtually. We will then have our panelists, 2 of them who are here from FANPAN, and then we are going to also have the panelists that are going to join us virtually, and thereafter we are going to have our discussion. So I'll be introducing those panelists later on, but I just wanted you to have a feel of how the program is going to run. And of course, after the discussion, we are going to have wrap-up and closing remarks from the CEO of FANPAN, who I'm also going to do the introductions later. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like us to stay tuned to the 5-minute video. As I said, it's going to depict on the work that ICRISAT is doing with its partners in the dryland agroecologies. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, as I mentioned, we are going to go straight into our session. My name is Rebi Harawa, and I'm the Regional Director for ICRISAT here in Africa. So a warm welcome again for those of you who are just joining us at this point. We are going to go straight and request our keynote speaker this evening, who is joining us from India, Hyderabad. He's Dr. Arvind Kumar, and is the Deputy Director General for Research at ICRISAT, and I will not go to read his CV because of time. Dr. Arvind Kumar, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. I hope you can hear me, you can see my slides. Can anybody confirm?
Yes, we can see. We can see on the slides. We can also see. Yeah.
Excellent.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. First of all, congratulations to ICRISAT Smart Food INI and Tenplan for having this side event, Transforming Agri-Food System in the Drylands of Africa, and the side event at the 8th Africa Agribusiness and Science Week. Thank you, and also thanks to all of you, the organizers. To all of you, the organizers. I'm sorry. Yeah, now it's okay. Thank you. So thanks to all of you for including me to this important event and providing me an opportunity to deliver a talk on building resilient smart food systems in Africa, perspective, challenges, and action plan. Now, built upon what we know what is happening in Africa, when 282 million people are undernourished, and in fact we need to adapt them to the resilient smart food system. Under this situation, when we have limited focus on the crops in terms of research and breeding, the varietal replacement rate is very low. We have a weak seed system, particularly for sorghum and the millets, and we all know the threat of the climate change, increasing threat of the climate change, increasing incidences of the drought, and food and nutritional security SDGs goal is still far away from accomplishment. We also understand that there is inadequate access to affordable farm inputs, organized marketing system, and lack of farmers' linkages to industry. And in fact, all these problems that I talked about agriculture in Africa is more severe in the drylands than anywhere else. Drylands where in 55 countries, more than 2 billion people, they stay and they practice agriculture. Now, what ICRISAT has been doing? For ICRISAT, research vision has been to enhance global food security, using new technologies to revolutionize the research, protect crops from impact of the pest and the climate change, bring application of the research and science to improve nutrition, health, climate resilience, and build capacity of the stakeholders with whom we work. And then thereafter, develop a sustainable production system. And ICRISAT have been engaged in doing this in Africa for last 5 decades. We are known to have the largest conservation of the germplasm resources for millet and pulses, and in fact, which we use in developing in going ahead with the crop improvement programs and taking forward a product profile based market needs breeding product. And in fact, we use modern breeding tools and technologies to develop biofortified and climate resilient crop varieties. Over last 5 years, I am proud to say that we have developed the speed breeding protocols as well as the facilities where now we can take 3 to 5 generations of the crop in place of where we were taking just 1 generation of a crop, a generation advancement. And now we are doing market-driven smart breeding and also the capacity development and partners. And in fact, we are known to be the early adopter of the new advanced technology. So one of the things that I struggled at ICRISAT has been desire that millet becomes as important food crop of every plate, as that of rice and wheat. And in fact, ICRISAT has initiated concentrated efforts to move towards that direction, that how we can improve the grain and cooking quality together with the nutritional quality and climate resilience of the millets. And in fact, we are engaged in development and introduction of the standardized scales for selection, development of the test for selection, and also mimics viscoelasticity properties of the wheat by understanding and modifying key millet components. And this is something that is very important if we really want to see millet in the plate of every farmer and every consumer. And then thereafter add these quality into our breeding program and use molecular tools to develop such varieties which is liked by each and every consumer. We have had some successes, and we have a long way to go, and we are proud of the successes that we have had in Africa. We developed the first sorghum and pearl millet hybrid. We run the sorghum and pearl millet hybrid parent research consortium in Africa, where we work with the number of partners, including the private sector together. We own the first pearl millet hybrid, Napegon, which is released in Burkina Faso. And in fact, it is the best suited crop for the Sahel's harsh agroecologies. We also have credit to have the first chickpea and the finger millet varieties released in Malawi, first biofortified pearl millet variety in Niger, Chakti, which has gone to the nearby countries also, and also the hybrid of pearl millet and sorghum under testing for commercialization in several countries, including Zimbabwe, Sudan. And now we are expanding our scope to oilseed crops, which we know are very important for the dryland regions, both from not only from the perspective of the production and the nutrition, but also from the perspective of the income to the farmers. Recently, new sorghum varieties have been released in Sudan in 2020. Varieties are released since 2010 of area and production. Identified variety of the pearl millet, which was released in 2018 in Niger, good amount of seed. And in fact, the other countries also, for example, Senegal. The other example is that of the dual. So both released in 2016, and in fact, of seed, it has also, and in fact, there are many examples like this for the millets and for the sorghum. Example of our work on pigeon pea in the food system in Africa, where in fact we have the credit to develop the first hybrid variety of the pigeon pea, ICPH8. But then these hybrids, they yield at 40% or higher yield over the local varieties. But recently, ICRISAT has developed early duration pigeon pea varieties and hybrids. You can have 120, you can have 140 days pigeon pea variety. Production technology has increased by 4.6-fold in Malawi during the last 20 years, and is attributed by 2.3-fold increase in productivity and 2-fold increase in the. And pigeon pea success in Malawi has spread to Zambia, Mozambique, and also are gaining interest in Ethiopia, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. We do wish to bring similar impact and effect of the other crops on which we are working. Now, most of you know, ICRISAT contribution to the seed. ICRISAT received the Africa Food Prize for 2021 for our variety sharing of the improved varieties and bringing benefit to 3.4 million hectares. And in fact, somewhere around we reached 25 million farmers. We continue our endeavor moving forward with strengthening the seed system, whether this is making sure that high quality seed of the climate resilient varieties are available to the farmers. Also develop a sustainable formal and informal seed system, but also introduce the digital system and link the demand and supply so that the farmers know where variety is available and how they can get that variety. In addition to engaging women to harness the entrepreneurship opportunities in the seed sector. And there exist a lot of opportunities for converting, talking to women, training them, and making them entrepreneurs to the development of the quality seed. And again, creating linkage between the public and private sector. We do understand that every stakeholder, including the public sector and private sector, and the policy advocacy is needed to further strengthen the seed system. More we put our efforts, more we can benefit and we can reach more farmers. Now, climate resilience, if we have the varieties, if we have the technology, if we have the seed system, it is necessary that we understand the climate change. And in fact, ICRISAT has been engaged for a number of years for our research on understanding the climate change, also identifying the needed traits, technology for adoption. We are engaged also with providing the weather advisory timely, and then also modeling and developing strategies, and then identifying and developing adaptation and mitigation interventions, and also risk reducing measures, crop insurance. Now, this is a very easy to effort to engage with all these aspects of the climate resilience and then work with the farmers. And in fact, in Africa, we have been working with the concept of the climate smart villages, where we redesign the farming system, taking into account historical and future climate analysis, and then working with the commodities to code for resilience and market develop the needed infrastructure. Now, for the drylands, water conservation is in fact, this is where I can see that we can do wonderful advancement in the production and the productivity. And what use we have demonstrated of India, but also certain parts of Africa. Of this, we use smart structure and the immediate decision when to irrigate. And in fact, this has also been a number of countries have worked, and in fact, you can see in the slide that it enhances the water productivity before when we use these tools. And in fact, we do have a plan that we bring these tools to more number of farmers irrigate, and also how much to irrigate. So the water conservation from both water and use the tools for irrigation has been our focus, and it has been benefiting the farmers. Now, coming to the nutrition, that and I said in the beginning that 282 million people are undernourished, and in fact, it's just not the undernourishment, the triple bundle of malnutrition, but also we are facing the lifestyle diseases, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases. We know that we have the lack of dietary diversity, and our children are going to wait, and there is lack of knowledge and nutrition. And also when we talk of that to masses, one of the aspects that came was the lack of processing technology and the infrastructure and limited availability and affordability of nutritious food products. So we have been working, integrating smallholder farmers to the value chain, integrating smallholder farmers to the industries. And in fact, we have been working at the community level. We have been working at the market level. We bring interventions to agriculture. We bring the food safety measures, educate people, And in fact, you can see the number of products which the farmers have developed working with us. And in fact, this is something not only increasing their increasing their access to nutritious diet, but also adding to the increase in the income. And in fact, AgriSet has worked a lot with the FPOs and number of farmers, and have handholded them and converted them into entrepreneurs. We did some work in Africa, and we want to do more work in Africa, and this is going to be the focus area in time to come. Our efforts that how we can integrate more smallholder farmers with the value chain and also with the industries. Now, smart food, important component of the consortium where we work with the FANPRAN, APARI, CORAP, and also FARA, and in fact have been always motivating us to bring the smart food to the masses. And in fact, we work with the criteria that what is the smart food that is good for you, good for the planet, and good for the farmer. And we studies, we do number of dissemination measures, we talk to number of partners, and I do welcome you and I invite you to contribute to our efforts so that we really achieve this success of high plate of more and more people in Africa. Now, this is my last slide. In the drylands, if we go by individual technologies, we will not have success. Dryland needs holistic solution. All these technologies moving forward together. And that is where at AgriSet, we have our strength to work at the system level, to bring the different components which we, on basis of what are the drivers of change, climate change, natural market demand, social capital, competitiveness, value addition, and then work with number of partners, farmers, FPOs, FPCs, private sector, industry, startup, entrepreneurs, connectors, and bring crops, agroforestry, livestock, off-farm together with the technologies on water conservation, seed system, mechanization, capacity development, suitable business model, digital innovation, monitoring and evaluation, and financial mechanism to achieve higher yield, to bring diversification, to achieve resilience, to bring carbon neutral landscapes, to bring processing and value addition, both prime, to link with new markets, to make sure that the last mile delivery is achieved, and to reduce waste, to provide farmers with higher income and sustainable livelihood, and thereby help achieve the SDGs goal on nutrition, health and food security, prosperity and livelihood, gender equity and inclusion, and environmental health and biodiversity. With this, once again, thank you very much to the organizers for the opportunity, and thanks to all of you, and we look forward to work closely with many of you in coming times.
Our next presentation and the last PowerPoint presentation is going to come again from Hyderabad. This will be from Dr. Saikat Mazunda. He's going to take us deep into the nutrition. How do we achieve resilience in nutrition in these dryland agroecologies? Dr. Saikat, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
You can see my screen also?
Yes. Put on full screen.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. And it's a good opportunity for me to be part of this important event here. And I will be taking you through our thoughts in terms of linking agriculture, nutrition, and entrepreneurship for transforming agri-food systems in the dryland. So if you look at the background, in terms of, we'll see that the global temperatures are predicted to rise by at least 2 degrees by 2050. And also in terms of, just 1 minute, I'll just adjust. Yeah, so the global temperatures are set to rise, and also the global carbon dioxide. As you can see here, it is estimated that 10% of yield losses will happen to most of the crops, and along with that, the nutritional quality. At this moment, by 2050, it is predicted that there will be rise by 20% of children. Yeah, 20%, leading to significant increase in child deaths. And of course, currently 10% of infants do not obtain adequate nutrition and energy, and there is need of proper weaning foods to be designed. Around 150 million children under the age of 5 and 45 million are wasted. And this is also going to further change as we move along in this climate. And of course, estimated impact on global economy, 3.5 trillion per year. So see this whole thing. So what I would like to link agriculture, nutrition, and entrepreneurship. And of course, this can agriculture. We are trying to do interventions at the local food, promote varieties with industry and consumable seed system, and of course, create and provide them with improved variety. Be a key component where we would try to design and vast different types of different food processing in the communities. We have already demonstrated that in different parts of India, in rural communities. And by doing this, we are able to make accessible quality feed and graded food products to the household, and also supplementary food for feeding programs and lifestyle diseases. Thus, we would create demand pull for local crops, address health of this initiative. Smart food is, of course, is something which is a global initiative, as already explained by Dr. Arvind. And we would like to leverage on this smart food initiative and see how we could move further into the food systems and strengthening the food systems. Smart food, as you can see here, is what we want to do to further add value to the value chain itself. Some of the breeding on nutrition has already been highlighted, and we need to leverage on that. And this is a high iron and zinc variety and other sorghum and pearl millet and finger millet, which can be leveraged to actually promote smart nutrition. Smart food to smart nutrition, that is something which we need to understand. And for that, already ICRISAT has developed a number of evidences, especially for millets. And these evidences show that reducing millets are good for reducing iron deficient anemia. We are also working on addressing diabetes and managing the risk of reducing diabetes. It also promotes delaying gastric emptying and managing blood lipid profile, and of course promotes increase in calcium retention in humans. So overall, we would like to leverage this smart food to actually break the intergenerational cycle of malnutrition, which starts from the adolescent girl and goes up to the mother and the newborn. So by choosing the right combination of smart food for nutrition, we would be able to address the nutrition needs of children, adolescent girls, and women. And of course, we would also like to look at using smart food to address especially the issues in the first 1,000 days of a child, where it is very critical that they get the right balanced weaning food. And then overall, we would like to leverage the nutrition and health benefits of smart food to achieve sustainable food and nutrition security across the different local food systems in Africa. Briefly, this is, if you look at this slide, it is very important that we understand that there are goodness in terms of amino acid profile, in terms of different amino acids which are present in, for example, pulses. Pulses are rich in sulfur-containing amino acids, and of course, chickpea and pigeon pea, they're high in lysine, and this tells us that we could actually complement each of them in terms of pulses and millets. And also, as you can see here, it is very important to know that the micronutrient profile of calcium in terms of calcium, which is higher than that of rice and wheat, maize, and also iron. So as you can see that millets and pulses can be used in complementation with each other for addressing different food requirements of different populations. So we would actually work together and develop winning foods to address malnutrition, geriatric foods, and address different lifestyle diseases. And of course, healthy snacking is something very important, which can be leveraged from the combination of millets and pulses. Coming to some of the products, where the demand-driven products, which we have already developed. In fact, we wanted to display some of these in our booth at this event, but somehow it has not reached in time. But as you can see here, there are a number of products possible across the value chain addressing different segments. In fact, we are also working on alternate protein segment, where we have use of millets and especially finger millet as a proof of concept to develop high moisture meat analogs, and these can further be used in developing different products. Also, as you see here, we have also developed a microwavable format of different millet variants as millet rice, because we want it to be used in different communities, where at this moment, even in households or even in urban households, it's very difficult at this moment to actually cook millets because of their cooking time, and also you need to do some pre-soaking, etc. So in this regard, I think we are working towards having some microwavable formats, which would actually mainstream millets into the plates, both in rural and urban locations. Finally, I would like to highlight that value chain approach for transforming food systems is very critical. And this is an example of what we are doing in India. As you can see here in the photograph, these women are tribal women who are for the first time empowered with processing units. They produce nutritious foods, which you can see here on the right-hand side. And these then go into the community feeding centers. And of course, one most important aspect which we have been able to see and highlight is that it is not only ICRISAT and the tribal community, but the engagement of different stakeholders, especially the different ministries and other grassroots level departments of the government, including the marketing department of the tribal affairs, was critical in making this model successful. So as we move along, it is very important for us to understand how we could bring all stakeholders together and in a value chain approach, make a transformation in the food systems, which is nutri-sensitive. And finally, I would like to end my presentation by saying that it is agriculture, nutrition, and entrepreneurship. But then on top of that, it is very important to ensure that we empower the gender equity, and empowerment is very critical. And this also needs to be taken into consideration. So given the International Year of Millets, I think this is the right opportunity for us to actually start with millets and then move on to the other crops and ensure that how we could actually mainstream them into the food systems, especially in Africa, and ensure that we have created a system where agriculture, nutrition, and entrepreneurship is driving this effort towards sustainable food systems. Thank you so much.
At this point, I would like to invite our panelists for the day. or for this evening. As I mentioned that this is a hybrid event, so we have panelists that are online, but also those that are physically here. First, let me invite Ms. Sitembile Mwamakamba, Director of Policy Research and Analysis at the FANPAN, to come in front, please. And I would also like to invite the CEO of FANPAN at this point. If you could join, I know that you are giving closing remarks, but I want you definitely to join us in front here so that we are not just the two ladies. As is joining us, I would like to introduce those panelists that are online. If you can, if I mention your name, please, you can switch on your camera so that people in this room can be able to see you. So I'm calling upon Dr. Tilahun Ahmed, who is the head of Sustainable Farming Program at Accra. Dr. Tilahun. Good evening. The next panelist is Dr. Padma Jaravla. She is a cluster leader in gender and youth at ICRISAT, joining us this evening from Hyderabad. Padmaja.
Hi, and welcome everybody to this side event on behalf of ICRISAT.
Thank you. Finally, I would like to invite Dr. Andre Van Rooyen, who is the Deputy Director for ICRISAT in Africa, joining us from Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. Andre?
Good evening, everybody. Nice to be with you.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with Sitembile from FANPAN because we have heard a lot about ICRISAT. When you look at this topic, when we are talking about transformation of agri-food systems in the drylands in Africa, what is your impression as far as FANPAN is concerned? Hearing what ICRISAT has discussed, and I know that FANPAN, you are doing a lot of policy research, particularly here in Africa. So over to you, Sitembile.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the presentations. I think one of the things that maybe stood out for me as I was listening to the presentations, but also thinking about the work that FANPAN does, and especially because we're part of the Smart Food Initiative, I think our interest really is on what are the enablers for this transformation. And coming from a policy analysis network, our interest really is what does the enabling environment look like? And so we have done work together with ICRISAT in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Tanzania, where we're looking at transforming smallholder irrigation schemes. And what we found is that there needs to be incentives. You know, there needs to be incentives in place, and there needs to be a deliberate promotion of public-private collaborations. So government on its own will not win. And for the private sector to be able to come on board and partner with the government, there needs to be policies and regulations in place that allow private sector to thrive and that don't stifle private sector participation. And so we have examples in these three countries that I've mentioned that we are working in, where the government, for instance, if you look at Mozambique, where they are promoting agricultural commercialization, and they've got the pro-agri policy that they've put in place, where they are really promoting commercialization and putting in place certain incentives that allow or attract investment into the sector. The pro-agri policy or program that the Mozambican government has put in place, for instance, provides incentives such as tax exemption, access to credit, and technical assistance to farmers. And that on its own, you know, is something that says, as a government, we are open to working with you. We want to make sure that you succeed. So really they are looking at, through that policy, they are looking at how they improve market access, how they improve value chain development, and also just making sure that the smallholder farmers have a sort of even footing when it comes to agricultural production, because we know that they already come from a sort of disadvantaged point because of the sort of land size that they have, or because they don't have enough access to financing and that sort of thing. Then in the case of Tanzania, for instance, another country where we are working on, we have seen the Tanzanian government's agricultural sector development program really going a long way to promoting private sector investment in agriculture. The program has provided tax incentives and has facilitated land access and tenure security, which I think is something that farmers appreciate, because once they know that, you know, they've got security, and as far as tenure is concerned, they can then develop the land and make sure that they put all their sort of investments into making sure that the land is productive. And so that program also promotes public-private partnerships, and it also facilitates linkages between smallholder farmers and agribusinesses. So this is some of the things that sort of attract investment in agricultural production and processing. Of course, there are other examples that we have also seen in Tanzania. There's the Kilimo Kwanza initiative as well, and in Zimbabwe as well, we've seen the government putting in place this command agriculture program. Of course, some of these programs have got, you know, benefits, and, you know, sometimes they come with some challenges as well. But there is that intentional, I think the issue of political will, where the government really wants to make sure that they create an enabling environment, has been key. It's been part of what we've seen as successes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have highlighted a number of things, but I think for me what stood out is the issue of land tenure, that it's one of the critical elements when it comes to taking these technologies to these dry lands. We can't just talk about technologies without land. Farmers, they need to be secure. But also some of the programs that are already going on in these countries, Mozambique, Proil, and then you talk of the Kilimo Kwanza, that I think there are already things that are happening there which we need probably now to start looking at what has worked and what has not worked. Dr. Tilahun, I would like to give this to you as a head of sustainable farming program at Accra. What's your impression on this discussion today, transforming agri-food systems in the dry lands of Africa? Accra being one of the key players on the African continent. Over to you, Tilahun.
Yeah, thank you very much, good colleagues. It's about food security, it's about environmental degradation, it's about managing risks. So there are so many technologies and practices that have been developed by research institutions like ICRSAT, most of the CGR centers. We keep saying we have drought-resistant, climate-resistant varieties. But, you know, I think Dr. Kumar said that, you know, it's easy to say farmers are either they are not accessing them, they don't have access to the technology practices, or, you know, even if they access them, they don't work because they are not context specific. So in Accra, what we're really trying to do is to address climate change from three perspectives. One is, I mean, the one which has been presented, which is called adaptation, so facilitate climate change adaptation capacity. The second wing we really try to do is make sure that small shocks are not disrupting farmers' livelihoods. What it means is, you know, enhancing productivity making sure that farmers are getting more from their farm so that they save money, they save food, they save crop, at least, you know, to manage a season or two without going back to poverty level. The third thing we are trying to do is how do we transform them, particularly using market change, support them to the next level, so that they diversify their systems, they invest on their farms and landscapes, be it in irrigation, be it in moving to processing and other value addition. I think the varietal contribution, climate resistant varieties has been pretty well mentioned by colleagues who have presented, and ECOSAT is pretty well placed in that. I just would like to add 2-3 things that has not been well emphasized. One is, degradation of landscapes and soils, and which is driven by low productivity. Farmers produce very little in their farms. Africa is still a 1.5 ton agriculture. So with increasing population, farmers, just because they cannot produce enough in their farm, they keep opening up, wetlands, forest areas, protected areas, and thereby, exposing the whole landscape into droughts and externalities, extreme events. And what we're really trying to do is, one, making sure that farmers are accessing critical inputs. For example, critical fertilizers, which are very important to produce more so that farmers remain where they are, but also are producing more biomass, so that more biomass means, improved soil fertility, less deforestation, and responsiveness to drought, because you improve soil holding capacity by bringing in more biomass in the system, but also making sure that farmers have incentives to do it, and the incentives are related to policy, related to markets, related to carbon, for example, markets linked into potential carbon market opportunities, but also sharing costs. For example, in terms of watershed management, we have been doing, making sure that there is a public investment and a collective action that people come in to contribute and benefit jointly. And then water is really a key issue, as it was mentioned by Dr. Kumar. And most importantly, when we talk about water, people talk about irrigation, but in most of African countries, the surface water is very much limited. So how do we really capture the water, the rainwater, store the water, and efficiently utilizing it? So it's about, and then bringing in the right variety, the right management, along with really climate resilient seeds. I think this has been tested here and there with various successes. But what AGRA, I think, has been strongly investing on is, how do you make sure that all this is really reaching farmers? Farmers have access to it. One, really one thing which really we have been trying to do is getting a government by creating an institutional capacity that can support the extension system, but also making sure that we identify the policy barriers, the gaps that are really, discouraging the private sector to be engaged in climate resilient systems. For example, water infrastructure like water pumps or mechanization. But also making sure that we are balancing between technical pushes, technologies, versus the social and the market dynamics surrounding the targeting and the drivers. So markets are really the major pull factors for people to adopt climate resilient soils. If you see the market response, for example, for drought-resistant crops like millets, like sorghum, it's much less, and the urban market is dictating what is produced in the villages. And so, how do we make sure that, like the type of I think, work that ICASAT has done in terms of smart foods, making sure that, the consumers are aware of what's happening, but also that's supported by production productivity. And the other, I think, major thing we are trying to do in Agra is having different delivery models for different target groups. Africa is very diverse. You have highland, high rainfall maize-based systems. You have a dry land maize-based systems. You have a very dry sorghum-based agropastoral systems. So the type of extension content that we bring into farmers, should be context specific. And just up to now, we used to get project-oriented content, which is not really responding to farmers' needs, but also is not used by extension agents to cascade down the information. Along with this, there is a very high extension to farmer ratio in Africa. In some countries, if you take Mozambique, for example, one extension is serving up to 10,000 farmers. Let alone serving them, they may not even know where they are. So how do we make sure that we minimize the farmer to extension ratio? And we in Agra are trying to develop a private sector-led extension system. We call them village-based advisors. In Nigeria, they call them community-based advisors. These are like people in the villages who are dropouts, graduates who didn't have jobs, retirees, all success who really are in the village, have the capacity to support farmers, but have to have also the incentive to do it. So link them with businesses, even bring in a bit of startup money, give them the extension content, digitalize it, and make sure that farmers are getting on-time information. And in Agra, we know that, and we are very much aware that we cannot do it alone. And there are so many institutions out there, from development perspective, CGIAR research system, universities, donors, all these have 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 donors. So we create a functional partnership and leverage on each other's investments, so that we have more of a consortia model which analyzes the gap of the system, and everybody contributes based on the skills, the investment levels, and the type of priorities. And that's really the type of approach we are following in Accra. And we have been employing a model called sustainable farming, which is really combining all these different productivity, climate management, environment, and landscape restoration, along with, of course, gender and government support.
Thank you. So I'm not going to summarize the points that you have ably, laid before us, but I think at this juncture, I would like to bring in the gender element, because I've seen already that there's conversation that is taking place. I think you have mentioned a lot about smallholder farmers, and we know that for Africa, we are really talking about women, most women who are involved actually in the area of agriculture production. So at this point, I would like to call upon Padmaja. You are a gender and youth lead. I want to hear from you. What is the gender responsive food system? We are talking of transformation here. So what role can research play in promoting a gender responsive food systems transformation? And because you also deal with youth, I think given that most of the African population, we are now talking of 60% being youth. So automatically when we talk about gender, we also have to talk about youth. Over to you, Padmaja.
Thank you, Ravi, and everybody can hear me. I can hear some echo, but I think now it is gone. So a good question. And as you can see in the chat box already, we are talking about how women are involved in this whole debate, or how women involved in the transformation process. Already there is some chat that is going on around this. Now, what do we mean by gender responsiveness in agri-food systems transformation? When we say gender responsiveness, so we've heard a lot about, these are the constraints of women, these are the roles women do, these are their activities, these are their responsibilities. We have the gender stereotypes and all that. So we have identified all of these so far now. We also identified what are the differences that, and also remember that men and women are not homogeneous groups. So there are differences, between a poor woman or a smallholder woman versus a woman who's got access to irrigation facilities in our farms. So you can see that these differences also exist. So how do the men and women experience different challenges is also different, right? And then a third point is we also talking about a lot about do no harm. So we say, like, when we are devising interventions or innovations, we also always ensure that, it does no harm to women. And when I say women, I talk about, yeah, women and men, the young, old, educated, literate, illiterate, different social groups, etc. So gender responsive actually takes one step ahead of these. So it just not only identifies what are the constraints of the challenges of the differences, it also not only identifies how you can, do no harm, but then it also starts us to start thinking about how we can make a conscious effort to address the gender and social inequalities that are already existing in the system, and how, if these inequalities can be challenged and can be kind of like slowly removed from the system, then we seek to advance gender equality. So that's what we actually mean by saying gender responsive food systems. Now, let me give you an example of how, quoting ICRISAT's experience, which Saikat has already alluded to in his presentation, which is called, where he called the convergence model that ICRISAT is already using. So what we have tried to do is, and everybody knows that millets are a women's crop, and given that this is the International Year of Millets, I want to take the example of millets here in explaining my point. And you know that, these crops, millets are women's crop. They grow in the harsh environment with little less resources that are needed, but they also need a lot of effort. In the term, when I say effort, the roles that women have to play in raising millets in their fields. So that means it is quite labor intensive and quite burdensome for women. So how do we move beyond this? So we know that these crops, cultivating these crops, has a greater time on women's time, and then it is more burdensome. So how do we then think about how we can kind of like make an effort to remove this? Now, when mechanization is introduced, most of the time, then the activities are taken over by men, leaving women either unemployed, so they lose out of their livelihood opportunities, or the income doesn't come to women. So making a conscious effort is, in the first place, is to educate, engage both men, boys, women, and girls in this whole process of how mechanization, small scale mechanization, especially mechanization which could be used by women, will actually help not only improving their livelihoods through employment, but it also gives them opportunities to take them one step forward. Sorry, not behind, but forward. And in this sense, when I say, how do we engage women in processing these millets? So value addition of the millets. And this is what exactly we are doing in our agribusiness and innovation platform activities. How can we make these women commercialize the millets through value addition and product development? And there comes in a major element of training. So the training goes to women, training goes to youth on how these products can actually be leading for improved nutrition in the first place, but also providing them with market linkages, so then it gets them more income into their pockets, which can be used for different outcomes. It could be better nutritional outcomes, better health outcomes. It could be also improving the asset base. So this is one example of how we can already start thinking about how can we make the agri-food systems more gender responsive through research.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you have highlighted the importance.
Would you like, do you have any questions to ask me, or would you like to?
No, not
example?
Not at this point. I think we'll give an opportunity to the audience to ask you questions later on. At this point, I would like to continue with the conversation and hear from Andre. Padmaj, I think, has emphasized the need for equipping these farmers, be it women, the boys and girls, training, making sure that they have access, for example, to mechanization. So, Andre, I want to hear from you if you would elaborate a few successes that you yourself, working in ICRISAT for close to 20 years. What is it that you have seen that is scalable in terms of transformation of these agri-food systems in Africa? And I think to our audience, in this discussion, we really want to pick the little issues that we can actually say this has worked and we can go and take it to scale. If there are any lessons that we have learned, we don't want to go and duplicate. So, Andre, would you please share with the audience on some of your experiences over the years? Over to you.
Thank you, Ruby, and good evening to the audience. Let me start off where Padmaja concluded her intervention. Some of our early work in ICRISAT, and one of the things that drew me to ICRISAT at the time was that ICRISAT is not just a crop institute. We have, over the last 20 years, in my experience, moved way beyond just producing arid-adapted crop varieties, and we've heard a lot about that in Dr. Kumar's presentation. But the importance of ICRISAT's work in the drylands, and what I think most of the people are beginning to recognize, is the systems approaches. So one of the first projects that I got involved with in ICRISAT, which I've worked on with many colleagues over the years, is the integration of cereals, legumes, and livestock. And as I say, I want to start off where Padmaja finished. Is in Zimbabwe or Southern Africa, we know that goats belong culturally and traditionally to women, and so do a lot of the legumes. So putting these different components of these dryland systems together in using legume haulms to feed goats and other livestock, using the higher quality manure that you get when you feed ruminants with legume residues. You put that in the soil, you get a response from the cereals. So you begin to build up the system from the soil up. And we've seen that when farmers are selling livestock, they buy food, they pay for education, they pay for human health. But we've also seen in many countries in Africa that livestock subsidizes crop production. I've just been in the rural areas of Ethiopia last week and learned from farmers that it's not any different here. A lot of income from livestock is invested in crop production. So when you begin to put these systems together, that's when you begin to build on not only the agroecological integration, where, as we've said earlier, I think Tembi mentioned land tenure issues, and the big elephant in the development room in Africa is the small land sizes. So when you begin to integrate cereals, legumes, livestock, chickens, goats, cattle, dairy, you begin to generate the synergies within relatively small parcels of land that increase water productivity of the whole farm, not just of a crop or a livestock, but the whole farming system becomes far more efficient. When you integrate and you develop the synergies, you also generate income opportunities. And we've seen in Zimbabwe and elsewhere that women farmers respond very well to markets, and they start selling their goats and improving nutrition of goats, so they get higher quality animals and they get higher prices for that, which means that they can begin to make a meaningful contribution to the household and local economies. And that is something that women farmers really take to heart, is when they can see their contribution not only to the household but also the economy. But the important thing for me personally is the impact on nutrition. When you begin to increase the productivity of legumes, of cereals, especially the nutrient-dense cereals that Saikat spoke about, but also the legumes and the all-important animal source food. We know that animal source food has got a tremendous help to the nutrition of women, especially during reproduction, but also the first 1,000 days of children. So the systems work in ICRISAT is where I think our strengths lie, in being able to illustrate at numerous levels that when you start working beyond just an individual crop or an individual entry point, you get massive improvements in the overall system. To conclude, Dr. Kumar referred to and Tembi referred to our work on irrigation systems. Now, again, I'm not a irrigation specialist, but looking at irrigation systems from a soft point of view, and how do we use markets to drive incentives? How do we use the smart tools to allow farmers to make improved decisions? You again see massive increases in production and productivity. And some of our impact analysis have really illustrated that farmers are producing a wider range of foods, they're engaging in a wider range of markets, and therefore we can pull it all the way through to seeing that farmers are able to pay more school fees, they are buying more assets. So the integration of the different components that ICRISAT and our partners work on has got multiple impacts at various scales. And some of our work in Zimbabwe that Martin Moyo, who unfortunately can't be here tonight, is leading, is that the government of Zimbabwe has pushed really hard to scale the irrigation work in that country. And the last thing I want to say is that all of this have led ACR to fund work that we're very excited to start with Tembi and FANAPAN on circular food systems. And that is really bringing everything together, but not just moving the food away from the point of production, but to begin to value add, to begin to experiment with circularity in the bioeconomies in the rural areas. And that's a very, very exciting opportunity, which we are very interested in pursuing. And if there are partners around in this room or online, please drop us a line. We're a very inclusive organization, and we'd love to work with you and explore how can we touch on all of these things from a circular food systems point of view. And Rebbe, with that, I think I've said enough. If there are any questions, I'll be very happy to try and respond to them. Thank you very much, and back to you in Pretoria.
Thank you, thank you, Andre. Thank you for giving us a flavor of some of the success stories, integrated crop livestock, goats, chickens, and specifically highlighting some of the successes on the irrigation technologies. At this point, I'm mindful of the fact that we have an audience online, but also that here in the room. Before we continue the conversation with the panelists, I would like to hear if we have anyone who has a question at this point. You have heard from FANPAN, AGRA, ICRISAT, in terms of how can we transform our agri-food system in the dry lands of Africa. And I think at this stage, when you talk of dry lands, some of the countries where we used to call them subhumid, now they are becoming dry lands. We are talking of now between 40 to 80% of arable lands becoming dry lands. I would like to see if anyone has a question or a comment, either online or in the audience. Those of you who are present here.
Thank you so much. I'll direct the question almost to all the panelists, but basically to the ones who presented on millet, sorghum, and chicken pea, but basically, and also pigeon pea. Some of these crops are regarded as orphan crops in Africa, and their adoption is low due to various reasons across the cultures of Africa. So maybe if they can share as to how can we best convince our farmers to adopt such crops, because they've been left unattended or less researched upon or less adopted by our farmers. So how best can we, as scientists, convince our farmers that indeed these crops are there to enhance food security? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Maimuna from Mali. I run a seed company. I didn't hear, I was sleeping, I'm sorry, but we'll be talking about pearl millet. I know in Mali there is a big market for pearl millet, but the post-harvest process is very difficult, and the yield is not that. I'm wondering when the hybrid seed will be ready for Mali, and if there is some mechanization for the post-harvest process, because it's very difficult. Still in my country, they are pounding to process the grain. Yeah, so that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mine is not a question, but rather a contribution. When it comes to adoption, like the gentleman was just talking about, you know, it's not for the researchers to promote what they have come up with. There should be someone who links between the researcher and the consumer, where we need to promote these foods. You find in some parts of the country or in this continent, particularly I'm from Zimbabwe, you find there are some researchers, ICRISAT is one of them, who's coming with technology on these traditional crops, their production, improving the productivity, and now the extension staff and nutritionists, they come with food and feed fairs or shows where actually they add value on the produce. How are they adding value, the processing, and also preparing the foods, different types of foods or recipes using these produce. So people get a chance of testing the food which is prepared from these produce which is processed. So it is important, particularly for the young generations, to have a chance of testing and appreciating these foods. And I also leave it as a challenge to the parents of the children that when they are attending these shows, wherever they go, even in their homesteads, they must also promote these the foods coming from the small grains. Someone was saying neglected crops. And once there's an appreciation from the kids, you find that, you know, the growth of it adoption becomes very, very popular. And then on the post-harvest, let me call it as pre-harvest and harvesting and threshing, like the lady from Mali was talking about. You find in Zimbabwe, again, there's technology. ICRISAT at the station in Matopo, there's mechanized way. Okay, harvesting, you can still use sickles, or that's by hand, or you can put a mini combine. But taking the technology of harvesting by hand, you find people cut, but when they bring their produce, when it's dry enough, they can now put it through a machine to thresh it. And then if it's not dried, they put in a dryer on the sun just to dry it. And then storage is just like any other crop. But mostly the small grains, they don't have a challenge of storage pests. So there is technology to this. And was the Andrew, the one from ICRISA, the last presenter, you find that when he was referring to ZIM, yes, definitely there is a lot of technology which is being used in Zimbabwe to improve the acceptability and adoption of these small grains. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Felista from Tanzania. I'm just a farmer from the central part of Tanzania, which is real dry. And we grow those millets, sorghum, and the pili millets. My concern is, as one of the presenter was talking about water, that how these institutions can help farmers, and mostly those who are growing those crops, to get water. I can give an example, because in the central part, if you drill, you get water, but drilling is very expensive for the farmers. Giving an example of myself, I have a drilled well where I supply water to the community. They grow those crops, but after harvesting, they have to bring those crops to get water, to exchange crops with the water. When it reaches October, November, they don't have water, they don't have crop. So, in my opinions, that if we solve the problem of water, we can solve all two problems. That is.
Thank you very much. You have had a lot of questions that have been said. The last question is from the farmer, who is she's actually in the trenches doing it, and it's about water. I think we have a private sector seed company from Mali. They are saying these varieties, where are they? They are there as a seed company, but there's a problem of post-harvest, and where are these hybrids? Then we heard somebody who says, but these millets you are mentioning, in Africa, they used to be there, and they are called traditional, and they are called orphans, and there are all kinds of names. In fact, we have been sitting here for the last 3 days, but there was no dish of millets. So why are we talking about them? And indeed, we know, we have seen the nutrition, we have seen the resilience, but where are they? What do we do? And of course, there was also a contribution on the comments on the kind of, learnings that we can actually use to promote, I think, some of the work that has been done in Zimbabwe with ICRISAT and other partners. So I would like to turn to my panelists at this point. And Fanpan CEO, I'm going to put you on the spot, because I can see that when we are talking about the tradition foods and we are talking about water and all that, there's a lot of issues around policy. I know that you are supposed to give us closing remarks, but I can't help it but to say that with all this conversation we are having here, where is policy?
Thank you so much for putting me on the spot, and I accept the challenge. In terms of attending to your question, there are challenges at national level and there are challenges at regional level. When we talk about policies, there are those that emanate from government at national. However, intent or statement of intent is there, but where is the investment to deal with these nexus issues? We can attend to water only, we can attend to agriculture only, but in terms of bringing it together within a country, the national investment plan needs to attend to these issues comprehensively. Going now to continental approach, the frameworks that are guiding us in terms of making sure that we are attending to the issue of transformation in a holistic manner. We need to make sure that at country level, there is harmonization and there's domestication.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me turn to Tilahun. I think you have heard about water, you have heard about the, our varieties, and I know that Accra, you are dealing with downstream delivery of these technologies. Tell us, what can we do?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Reddy. My background is a bit noisy and I'm how do we convince farmers? I think it's a $1 million question. It's not about convincing farmers. Farmers are convinced, but they don't have the incentives to grow those crops for 3 reasons. One is, most of African farmers are producing what they eat. So the food habit is dictating really what is produced. In case markets are not functional, farmers, rely on those crops for their household nutrition. So do we really have that food habit considered, but also making sure that if not, then how do we make sure that we help farmers to diversify, households to diversify their food systems, their food habits, including the home economics component of it. The second disincentive of these crops is, in most cases, are low yielding compared to the other crops. Compare it with a root crop, compare it with maize. They are, in most cases, are producing 50%, 60% of what you can get from those crops, with a similar type of input. So how do we increase productivity and enhance what we call input use efficiency, fertilizer use efficiency, labor use efficiency, so that farmers are compensated, even if the market is attractive, unless they produce enough per unit of land, those crops will remain to be whatever, minor crops. The third issue is then, of course, the pull factor, which is a market factor. So unless there's a reliable market, and that reliable market has multiple, components. One is really, the linkages market, with the infrastructure, having the agro dealers, distancing into agro dealers, and then, of course, the processing, the value addition, all that comes into market. So that component is also a disincentive for now, for farmers. Also, some, people are in Europe appreciate millets, appreciate crops like teff in my country, but the local appreciation for those, crops like sorghum, millets, still very much limited, and the market is not yet responsive. On the water issue, there are 2 challenges. One is, probably 3. One is, having the water. Madam from Tanzania mentioned about shallow wells. So really having that finance, access to finance to get those drills. The banks are not responding. There's very limited opportunity for finance. Then once you have the drills, and you need a water lifting facility, which should be maintained, and then you have the efficiency. Once it reaches the field, how do you make sure that that water is efficiently utilized? And that efficient utilization is about agronomic efficiency, but also about choices of commodities, so the return per investment. So what you get from high value crops is much higher. So what type of really commodity you grow, to respond to that market using the water. If you grow cereals using water, it's very limited incentive. So these are like in totality barriers, and if you really want to enhance water budget in the system, then we have to link it to watershed management. Making sure that we encourage communities to capture the water and enhance the discharge, so that downstream irrigation can be viable and sustainable. Over to you, Rebi.
Thank you, Drahun. Thank you, Saikat, the issue of traditional food, you have heard about it, and I think you mentioned something about this year is the International Year of Millets, and I think this was declared by the UN, I think with the very fact that these are foods that we know they are loaded with nutrients, they are resilient, but somehow we don't see them served. What can we do? And how will this International Year of Millet actually help to bring these foods to the fore?
Yeah, thank you, Ravi. I think that's a very relevant question. We all know that they are nutritious. So in that regard, what we have understood is that one is how convenient or affordable or in a format which we can make these available the communities is something which we need to discuss and find a way out of it. Right now, in some of the programs which I'm undertaking in India, millet was never part of the community feeding program in the past. But today, we see that given the rightly formulated food, and one very important thing is in these community feeding programs, it is the taste of the product which matters in addition to the quality, etc., and nutrition. So we need to understand the consumer, and based on the consumer requirement, the consumer preference, and the taste and palatability and convenience, these needs to be understood. On another front, we also need to look at the policy support which the government needs to drive actually to ensure that these crops have certain demand in the private sector, because the private sector is going to lead this revolution of millets, especially in the International Year of Millets. The private sector needs to drive this. And we have seen in India that there are certain incentives provided to the private sector if they start using millets. So similar policies should also be looked into across Africa, maybe flour blending, and deciding that if one of the companies or the companies use a certain level of flour, they get certain millet-based flour, they get certain incentive. So I think these are some of the things which we need to look into, and look at the consumer and what the consumer wants is very important. And getting the private sector to create the demand pull, and also having certain elements of, say, contract farming with some of the private sector, so that the farmer gets confidence to grow these crops. Because right now, I think there is no assurance that the farmer's produce will be bought. So they might move into some other crops. So I think these are some of the things which we need to look into. Yeah, I think, hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Arvind Kumar, I want to take this question around how do we make these hybrid fast to get to where they are needed. We have a seed company from Mali, and they are saying, yes, we have the varieties, but how fast can we get them? And I know that within the research program, there is a lot of effort of making this steady system function, even where we have hybrids. Over to you. Arvind, are you there? Okay, I'll skip that. Let me go to Andre. Andre, help me if you can be able to answer that, but also bringing, again, some light on what should we do with water. We have heard from Agra perspective. You have highlighted some of the smart irrigation technologies, but what else can we do to make sure that we can be able to grow these crops under these circumstances where we are increasingly find a lot of water stress? Yeah, Andre.
Thank you, Ruby. I just want to go back to the earlier discussion you've had now about the sorghums and the millets. Owing made the very important point that the sorghums and the millets will not compete with maize and the other crops that produce really large yields. But I think we need a paradigm shift in what space do we want to compete. We cannot compete with maize at the level of yield, but we can compete with maize when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to the cultural value or the multiple purposes of these crops. And I think that is the niche that we need to exploit. And I think the UN Food Systems has really triggered that and created a much larger awareness. And we've seen the papers that ICRISAT has published on the value of these crops for managing type 2 diabetes and other metabolic disorders, its real contribution to human nutrition. And I think if we all come together, it's not just researchers' responsibility. The private sector needs to come to the party, develop those mechanization models to thresh, harvest, and process these crops. It's not just for ICRISAT. And I think, as I've said earlier, ICRISAT is at the forefront of developing these systems approaches. So I would encourage our seed systems person from Mali to contact the ICRISAT office there and really make it clear that there's a demand for this. There's a demand for the mechanization. We can go and look for those private enterprises who are engaged in that space, and then through multiple partnerships, because that's what it will require to get these crops back on the agenda will take hard work from many people. And it's high time that we do that, but I think it is possible because there's a great demand for it. But we need to connect all the dots. With regards to water, Tilo partially answered that question, but from the work that we've done in the space of water, and we have some colleagues from IMI on this call as well. Often I've heard people say that if we just had access to water, all of our problems would go away. But unfortunately, that's not true. And we've seen that in many irrigation and small-scale and farmer-led irrigation systems, is that adding water adds a whole new dimension of complexity. Managing water is a very, very difficult thing to do. But it can be done. ACR in Australia has developed some very, very smart tools that Dr. Kumar referred to. Our work in Tanzania will continue. There are people working on that. we can help farmers. Some of those tools have become very cheap. But I go back to where I've started around integration of systems. I think, let's take the example of Namibia. Namibia is one of the most arid countries in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. And they are generating an immense amount of livelihoods out of livestock, and they buy their food. So I think there comes a point where we need to say, okay, is this agroecology suitable for crop production or not? If it's not, what can we do with livestock? What can we do with drought-adapted species? Or, as I've been talking a lot about, is can we begin to explore the opportunities of perennial crops with very long-rooted systems, root systems, that we can exploit more arid areas? And I think there are those opportunities for us to begin to explore with the great breeders around and the things that we can do nowadays with gene editing. If we can get roots down 2-3 meters into arid soils that can utilize water from a much greater depth, I think there's huge opportunities there. So yeah, the bottom line is we need to integrate systems properly. Where the crops fail, the chickens and the goats and the cattle need to function. And if we get those integration right, we can make much better use of water. Rebbie, back to you. I hope I'm not taking too much time.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to give another opportunity to the panelists to basically to answer one question and also give their final thoughts around this topic. So let me go to Tembi. What innovative policy intervention can be adopted to attract investments and promote technology advancement in agri-food system in Africa's dry land? I think investment is actually the big elephant in the room. So what policy intervention and any of your final thoughts on this topic?
Okay, thank you. I think maybe if you allow me, I will also just respond to the question on what needs to be done to farmers to promote. I think for starters, we need to change the narrative around these crops. We cannot keep calling them orphan crops. We cannot keep calling them neglected crops, because by virtue of calling them that, then we are just leaving them to the side and not bringing them on board as mainstream. And I think it's really important that we change the narrative. And also farmers will grow what sells. So the market needs to be right. We need to make sure that us as the buyers, we are not going to the shops to buy rice or to buy, mealie meal, but we are going to buy sorghum, millet, and flour to be able to cook. So those are two things that I thought of when the question was asked, to say, let's change the narrative, but also let's start eating that food, because the farmers will only grow what they can sell and what they can profit from. Then in terms of innovative policies, I think, as I mentioned, there are quite a number of policies that have been implemented that are actually doing quite well. That have incentives inbuilt to attract private sector investment, which is what we want. And so for me, we need to make sure that we share the lessons from the countries where it's working to other countries. I think as a continent, there's just a tendency to experiment and try new things all the time without learning from what's worked. And also learning is not only just from successes, but it's also from failures as well, so that we can improve on that. And I think that's really important. I think something I've heard during these last 2 days is the fact that when it comes to policymakers, they want to know what's in it for you. So as people that have an interest in promoting these indigenous crops, we need to have our story straight when we go to the policymakers, because they won't sign policies or programs without being convinced that this is the way to go. So we need to be the ones that are actually quite vocal in promoting these crops, but we also need to be the ones that can stand for all the questions that will come our way. What's the nutritional value? What's the sort of cost benefits that will come from growing those things? We need to get our stories straight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those powerful submissions. I would like to get back to Padmaja as your last submissions. So you have heard, I think the crops that we are talking about that are resilient in the drylands, apparently they are called all kinds of names. But I would like to remind our audience that I think this is now what we are calling smart foods. And I think they deserve to be called smart foods because they are food and nutrition loaded, but we are also talking about resilience to grow under the current circumstances with all the droughts that we are facing. And of course, if we can package them rightly, I think they can even find themselves in the supermarkets, and we have heard even that we have microwavable products. So I want to hear from you. A lot of the issues around nutrition, how you can change the behaviors at the household level, really it's a lot of discussion that women need to advance. Yeah, what is your take on this behavioral change so that we can really get back this food to the table? Particularly now we are talking of our young people that today they don't want something that cooks for 6 hours. It has to be microwavable. What should we do? Over to you, Padmaja.
Thanks, Debbie, for that question. And I think I also agree with you that we need to move away from the terminology of orphan crops or abandoned food or food that is, consumed less or grown less. And smart food is a good way to call these crops. But in terms of behavior change, the first thing that I think we should start doing, whether it is women, whether it is youth, and engaging men, as I always say, because if we do not engage men in all these conversations, then we are only meeting half of our target beneficiaries. So always it is right to engage men in all our conversations, because there are harmful, norms around masculinities that men may be facing. So engaging men in all our conversations is a good approach when you're talking about food, nutrition, security, empowerment, etc. So the first thing that we should be doing is work with the communities, talk to them about what their current dietary habits are, current practices are. How did these dietary habits and practices evolve? And you would definitely find a link to saying that, they used to consume millets, they used to consume sorghums, they used to consume these small millets in one form or the other, either the grandparents or the great-grandparents did have them in their diets. And that's how you slowly bring that conversation to introducing these millets back into their plates. As far as nutrition is concerned, what is in the plate is what matters for nutrition, because you might talk 110 times about, not eating junk foods, not going in for foods that are like carbohydrate or energy dense, but looking at foods that are rich in vitamins and minerals. You may talk about all this, but then it's very difficult to make sure that these are the foods that are found on the plate. So when you want these foods to be on the plates, I think the first thing is to start with them, start the conversation with them, understand what their dietary habits and practices are, challenge some of the myths and norms around food, because, food is culture. Yeah. And how can we then bring about the desired communication or the behavior change, either through communication, through hands-on training, through capacity building, through experimentation, through food recipes, through documentaries, and so many other ways that you can think about. But start with them first. That's how I would like to start the conversation, so that we bring about the desired behavior change. So work with the communities. And that also leads me to my second point that I would like to emphasize on is the food sovereignty. Look at it from a food sovereignty perspective, like, where people have the right to eat what they have been culturally eating, and how we can actually enable food sovereignty in the rural, in each and every target communities that we would like to work with. So that would actually lead to better nutritional security also. So these are the 2 points that I would like to make to this question that Ravi you had asked.
Thank you. Thank you. Saikat, if you are still there, I wanted to, as you are giving your final thoughts on this, I know that in your presentation, you probably touched on it, on how this, smart foods, the millets that we are talking about, that are really resilient in these dry lands, but the elements of nutrition that relates to issues of, non-communicable diseases and gluten-free, I think these are the kind of things that sometimes we miss in the knowledge, because we are just thinking, we are just filling our stomach. But if you can give us your final submission and really say, what are the 1, 2, 3 things that when people are eating, they are not just eating empty calories, but it's also related to our health, human health. Over to you.
Yeah, so Ravi, I think communicated to the masses in some format which the masses understand. So it could be in the form of cartoons, it could be in the form of stories, or some communication which is beyond just science, which we scientists are used to talking. So that sort of communication needs to be created, and which we are already doing now. And I think that's something which we need to understand. In terms of validation and other things, the entire scientific community is working, and especially with the International Year of Millets, there will be a lot more evidences and publications that will come through. But I think most important is to communicate those in a form that the common masses understand, and that will create the demand pull automatically as they realize that these are good for them. So good for you, good for the planet, and good for the farmer. And of course, we need to also ensure that we make these products palatable and tasty. That is most important, because from our studies, what we have done, and Padmaja will agree, that in these community feeding programs, which we are doing, previously the school children would not come and eat the normal food which was being served. But when we provided these millet-based foods, which were prepared actually in an interactive manner, formulated based on discussions with them, getting their feedback. And we realized that within 3 months of the project, these kids were actually regularly coming to the community feeding centers because they found the food tasty. So that's something which we need to look into, along with mainstreaming or taking advantage of the nutritional benefits of these crops. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I see 2 hands. One is the audience, and there's also Padmaja. Can we give a chance to the person on the audience before we come to Padmaja?
Thank you very much. Apart from the nutrition, you find on the smart foods, they are also medicinal. If you look at there are some people, a doctor, who is actually promoting the consumption of these smart crops. You find that they say if you consume food, food is the feed for cancer growth. And unlike the small grains, the millets, that's the finger millet, the pure millet, if you feed on those, they actually anti-growers of cancer cells. So really, he encourages people to eat the smart grains. Where we went to today, we saw Mexican wild sunflower. We eat that twice a week in our house, and the way it's eaten is prepared exactly the same as you do your pumpkin leaves, whether with peanut butter or with oil. And the person who introduced that to us no longer takes medication for BP and sugar. So they are also medicinal. So apart from looking at the traditional or these smart vegetables, yes, they are nutritious, and at the same time, they are medicinal as well. In terms of breeding program, you find coming up with, I come from, my background is agriculture, and I have been working for seed houses for the past 25 years. So you find that with breeding, a hybrid would take minimum 10 years and probably another 3 years for trials, and that would be 12 to 13 years before you release a hybrid. But with technology now, you find there's a new technology which can take up to 3 years to come up with a hybrid, and probably another 3 years just to try and promote. So the time has been brought down, and in Zimbabwe we find we've got that technology, and coming up with hybrids is very fast these days. And let me look at irrigation. You were talking of water. What our government has done is they have come up with a program, or we have come up with a program where each village is going to get a borehole, and we've got 35,000 villages. Each village you get a borehole, and you get a village garden of 1 hectare. And in that garden, there will be 3 fish ponds, there will be citrus, or orchard rather, can I say, and growing of vegetables for nutrition security. And at the same time, each school, we've got 9,500 schools nationwide, and each school is going to get a similar facility of a borehole and a garden as well. And the drilling of boreholes in Zimbabwe has become cheaper. It's about 800 US to 900 US, where you can, that's minimum 42 meters, where you can drill a borehole. And as a community, you can just put hands together, and maybe the 5-10 of you drill one borehole, which you can share as a community. So yes, we are not yet there, but as a country, we are getting there, where we have realized water is very important. And finally, I want to say, the millets, I'm not disputing the point that they can't reach the yield of maize. At ICRISAT, at 1 year, I told I've been 25 years in the industry. There's 1 year, millet have yielded 11 tons per hectare, while its maize was 7 tons. So it surpassed the production or the yield of maize. And why we always say, or scientists say, millets yield less than maize or sorghums, is just because when we are breeding millets and sorghums, or these smart crops, we target them into the marginal areas or drier areas. And yet when you take them to high potential areas, they can still perform very well. So in my experience, I have said the small grains must also be produced in high potential areas, where we can actually promote productivity and promote the consumption. And as a result, you find we can actually have a balanced nutrition and balanced food security as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have to balance the time here. We are 3 minutes to the end. Padmaja, if you could do your intervention in 30 seconds, then I'm going to give another 30 seconds to Andre. Over to you, Padmaja.
So my simple message which I wanted to add to what Saikat had said was, like, you try to understand what the myths are about food. Like when you're introducing millets into the feeding programs, etc. We had this large conversations, many conversations with kids and with women on what they were eating, and then what are some of the myths around food, and we tried to break those myths. That also helps in improving the consumption of millets. That was the only point that I wanted to add.
Andre.
Excited when I hear farmers, private sector, policy researchers talking all about the same subject. And I think if we can increase the frequency of this kind of dialogue, it will bring the issues to the surface that we can address, not just the scientists, but also private sector, also farmers. And we need innovation at various social, technical, ecological, institutional innovations to get this to the surface. But it starts with conversations like this. So I would really thank you, Rebi and Fanapan, for helping us out to put these issues on the table. And because it's the collective thinking and the cognitive diversity that comes out of conversations like this that would push the smart foods to the level that they deserve. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. At this juncture, I would like to ask the CEO of Fanapan for the closing remarks. And I think if you take the podium, over to you.
Thank you so much, Program Director. Let me try to have this one sorted out. So, colleagues, so that you stay with us till the end, let me front load my gratitude for you staying with us till this late, for those who are present here, and also acknowledge those who have attended virtually. When I counted, we picked for those who are attending here at plus or minus 30 participants. Virtually, we picked at around 25. We really, really appreciate your time. So I will be very brief in terms of giving the summary of the deliberations. To remind ourselves, we are staying here till this late to talk about a very important topic on transforming agri-food systems for the drylands. Knowing the challenges that are related with the drylands. They are now becoming climate hotspots. And two, these parcels of lands are mostly marginal. So what is it that we can do to make sure that we really up the productivity of this production system? I will summarize my takeaways in two categories. The first category, I will focus on what came out in terms of the what with regard to focus areas. They are tailored solutions that were suggested. And for me, the main two words that came out with regard to the what. First one is about smart. The second one is being sensitive. We are being smart and sensitive to what? 6 things. We are talking about being climate smart. Number 2, we are talking about food system productions which are smart. Thirdly, we are talking about this delivering on a nutrition sensitive production system. Number 4, we are also saying that we are also seeking to deliver on a production system which is healthy sensitive. And 6 and last, we are making sure that we are gender sensitive. what lacked in terms of our deliberation, the element of us, number 7, as being youth sensitive. So to reiterate, we are being smart and being responsive to make sure that we are delivering impact at a wider and deeper scale. In terms of the opportunities, I was very much glad to see that we are moving away from talking about farm value chain to landscape value chain, to make sure that we are attending to providing solutions not only on farm, but from farm to fork out to the table. And I've highlighted few things that we are trying to tease out here. Making sure that we are having capable seed systems in terms of making sure that the varieties that we're talking about are available and accessible. The other thing we are saying that we need to make sure that the production systems that we are supporting through our research evidence are contributing to enhanced production in terms of effectiveness and making sure that we are attending to efficiency and that they are sustainable. The other issue that we need to also think through, which also came from the discussion, we should not talk about intervention to the farm gate. What is it that we need to focus on when we go to talk about post-harvest stages of the value chain? We spoke about processing, we spoke about value addition, but more so in terms of value addition, we are talking about alternative products that are palatable and that are attractive to the young generation. The other thing that need to be at the center of things is that we need to have the market for the products or the produce that we're talking about. The other thing that interested me, which I think is very important, is that we are also focusing on how these products that are produced are being utilized at household, in terms of how the food is preparation, how the women are starting to get engaged in terms of handling of food, issues of food safety, then we attended to. But what is more important, we are not only about producing and eating a household. This is also about making sure that these enterprises are earning income. So issues of agro-entrepreneurship, they are coming through, but what we need to do or think through is what is it that we can do to build capacities and capabilities of SMMEs. The other issue that Andre brought to the center of the debate is that we are now talking about producing food, but depending on the paper or the document that you're reading, between 30 and 50% of that food is lost. So the issue of circular economy to make sure that we are attending to food loss and waste is very important. The second segment of my reflection, moving away from the what, is that the process is equally important to the what. So the issues of co-creation in terms of, number one, making sure that we attend to understanding as researchers, whose agenda are we attending to? So the issue of co-creation is very important. The other issue with regard to co-creation is that we are dealing with a very pervasive, complex issue here. How then do we make sure that we are attending to this issue using a nexus lens, leaving no one behind? Number two, in terms of the process, we are presenting proven concepts that were validated. And my assertion is that as Africa, we have already paid a very hefty, expensive school fees. We have learned enough. My suggestion is that the things that we know that they work, and they've been proven to work, how then do we take them to scale? And using the CG language, there are three types of scaling. Scaling up in terms of making sure that we are influencing policies and regulation. Scaling out in terms of what has worked in one geography then can be adapted and be used in other geographies so that we don't keep on doing the same things. And number three, to make sure that where we are involved, we scale deep, to make sure that we are making difference where we are supposed to be touching lives. Moving fast, given that we don't have time, the third element about the process, that we need to also focus on capacity strengthening. And then when we do this, we know that we have got multiplicity of stakeholders, so let's have our capacity strengthening initiative tailor-made to those initiatives. If I've got time, I was going to categorize what is needed in terms of capacity across the different arrays of stakeholders. Number four, we need to have a transdisciplinary approach, which is added with multisectoral approach, which is also making sure that we're not only attending to the biophysical research side, but we are also now bringing the social economics side. And then what emanated here is that we need to also understand the behavior of people in terms of the use of the consumption of these food products. Number 5, we need to have partnership delivery mode. FANAPAN alone cannot deliver, ICRISAT alone cannot deliver. How can we have a partnership that can deliver a transformed food system which is functional for Africa? Number 6, we need to have conducive or enabling policy environment. As FANAPAN, that is our mainstay or is a core business. So we avail our platforms and our experiences in terms of partnering with different organizations to deliver on their mandates. And lastly, I want to add these 2 further opportunities which we can explore. The first one is that Africa is priding itself with youth dividend. How can we start to integrate youth within our work? The other one, which was mentioned here, which in my view is very important. How can we start to build the momentum around the government procurement systems? Government is the biggest buyer. If we want to make sure that these products are entering the mainstream, we need to make sure that we are leveraging the government procurement dividend that can be provided. In conclusion, we have been operating at a micro and pilot scale. We need to have a huge program which is delivering the way we are talking about here, that we have learned and we've learned is enough. So I think after this as a product, let's put our heads together and design a program which is bankable and which can be funded to attract investment from private or public sector to make sure that we advance this agenda. The last point is that 2023 is the International Year of Millets. What is it that we can make sure that this provide an entry point to make sure that we build momentum on the things that we're talking about? Lastly, since I've front-loaded my thank you, I will repeat it again. I really, really appreciate you being here and for staying with us till the end. I will yield back to the program director, then to close off the session.
Thank you, Dr. Tselis, with those very loaded closing remarks. At this point, I would just like to thank our audience. Indeed, we were not thinking that this is to 7, it's very dark here, there will be anyone here. So we need to clap hands for ourselves. Let me thank our colleagues in, who have joined us virtually, Dr. Arvind Kumar and the team. They are joining from Hyderabad, and this is, I think it's now past 10, and it's not easy to be there just to listen and talk, but we thank you that you have been with us. Those who are joining in Ethiopia, please, we want also to thank you that you have been with us. The audience that you have been online, we also want to thank you very much that you have been part of this discussion. I think from what Dr. Tselis has ended, he has actually said that this is not the end of this conversation. And those of you sticking around here, there is one message we are bringing, that you are committed to make this dry land resilience and nutrition being part. So we invite you to be with us at the International Year of Millets, which is going to be commemorated in Kenya. We are bringing India and Africa together, 30th to 31st of August. Please mark that on your calendar. I can see that there are so many interested parties. We can continue this conversation, and we want to form a global network of sorghum and millets, which are part of these smart foods for the dry land. Thank you very much to all the colleagues that have made this happen, Gilbert Obiero, our comms team, and so many other people in FANPAN. Also our IMI colleagues who couldn't be here, but it has all been possible because of all your contribution to this. And of course, FARA, who are hosting this event. We say thank you very much, and have a very good night.